This is Tell Me What to Read, the podcast of booktopia.com.au. I'm Nick Wasiliev, and I'm delighted to be back doing another Friday book discussion session. And this week we are delving into the world of speculative fiction. And joining me today, I have two fantastic authors and book specialists. Firstly, I'm joined by David Henley, fiction publisher and founder of Brio Books, which is now part of Booktopia. He's also an author in his own right, author of The Hunt for Pierre Jr. David, welcome.
Hello.
And my second guest is Trent Jamieson. He's a publisher and runs the Avid Reader Sci-Fi Book Club based in Brisbane. He's also a multi-award-winning novelist and short story writer. He's the author of the Deathwork series, The Nightbound Land Duology, and Dayboy, and he has a brand new book which is coming out called The Stone Road, which actually came out earlier this week. Trent, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. It's very lovely to have you here both to discuss the world of speculative fiction. And David, I'm going to kind of throw this question to you first, just for any readers who are not familiar with what speculative fiction actually covers. What does speculative fiction cover?
Look, speculative fiction, it covers almost everything now. Now that the world of literature just likes to pillage spec fic for ideas, pretty much anything that deviates from reality can be considered spec fic. But more specifically, it's usually fantasy and science fiction related themes. Trent, you got anything better than that?
Well, I think that's right. There's definitely a trend in literary fiction to devour the spec fic concepts. And that's because most of the authors that are coming out now grew up either watching spec fic movies or reading it. And so they usually, the path for a literary writer these days seems to be you write one kind of mainstream literary novel, and then you move in and you do the thing you really want to do, but you have the cover of literary fiction in a way. But yeah, I would also add horror to that as well. I think that's definitely a genre that's becoming popular again. You couldn't use the word horror 10 years ago, but I feel like now it's something that people will talk about in polite company again.
Well, if anything, horror is having a bit of a resurgence. I mean, I think there's a lot of great writers going into horror to go, I think it's one of those things writers do. They'll look at it as a challenge and go, you know what, I can bring my literary awesomeness to this genre and like really give it the respect it deserves.
Absolutely. And I think too, we are living in troubled times. And I know Stephen King in Dance Macabre, his book about writing horror fiction, which I read a very, very long time ago. His argument was that the more troubled the world, the more popular horror generally was, because it became almost a form of comfort and a sort of an easier way to deal with darker issues. So yeah, it's a good tool.
It is. And it's interesting. I was actually, it leads me quite nicely into a quick question, is because right now it seems like there's a lot of fantastic speculative fiction coming out right now. Is it the fact that I'll throw this to you, Trent, first, but do you think it's the fact that we are living in such dark times as at the moment with so many things happening in the world, both, internationally and close to home, that it is such a strong time for speculative fiction? Because it feels like there are so many fantastic books in the genre that are coming out right now.
Absolutely. I think speculative fiction, and this is perhaps why it has moved into kind of the literary mainstream a bit too, is it's just such a wonderful way of dealing with issues, and it can approach them directly, but it's also kind of distancing as well. And it's, there's an element of escapism, so you feel like you're not doom scrolling, but you can also look at various different issues as well. And I feel like at the moment we're entering this incredible period. It's almost like the late 60s new wave again, where we have an incredible range of diverse authors writing about diverse topics. There's just, I feel like if anything that you're interested in, you can find a spec fic take on it. And it makes it very hard if you're having a discussion about speculative fiction, because it's such a broad church now. You're always going to miss things that are coming out. It's very hard to be on the cutting edge as a reader, because there's just so much of it and so much really good stuff. So whatever we talk about is going to be, just our particular interests, our take on the genre. And I think that's also a wonderful thing. There's room for everybody in spec fic.
Yeah, there is. And David, I know that every time that we meet up and we talk about the new books that Brio has coming out, I know that spec fic is a very prominent feature.
I know. It's like word got out that there was a spec fic publisher.
What's your experience been kind of seeing all of these spec fic books emerge? Because every time we catch up with you and hear about the new books that Brio has coming, it's incredibly, it's extremely mouthwatering to hear some of the concepts.
Look, it's great. I mean, it's great, but it's relentless. We try not to think about the words per minute. We have to sort of consume and filter as the submissions come in. But really, it's a few million words a week. We have to somehow make a decision on. But what we're getting, we're getting such a broad range from horror. I mean, I've signed my first horror recently, and the spec fic like Trents, which is another sort of genre bending type. And now I've just got sent another one, which is a whopper 250,000 word story. And it is epic. It's epic. So, I mean, in terms of breadth, as well, sometimes I don't even notice when it's spec fic, I guess. Like I've got Jane Rawson's History of Dreams coming out. And to most people, the description of an alternate history bend off Australia type thing would be spec fic, but it's like, nah, that's really kind of more in the literary realm now. But I see what you're saying, that's not real.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's like violence. I've been desensitized to speculation, and anything normal. I mean, in some ways, the pressure is on reality-based fiction now, because reality has to be depicted so closely. There doesn't seem to be much tolerance for fictionalizing reality unless you are writing spec fic.
It definitely is an interesting time to see all of these in changes and speculative examinations of reality. And it's I think now is a good time to jump into what the actual spec books that we've been reading. And Trent, I know you've brought a whole bunch with you for our podcast today. What spec fics have you been enjoying over the last little while?
Okay, well, I'm always reading new stuff, but my reading is essentially in bed while I'm trying to get my daughter to go to sleep. So I have to read in the dark. So it does limit the things that I have access to sometimes. But I thought I'd start with
just glow in the dark books he's reading. It's very small range.
Yes. But they're also good in the bath. So the first book I wanted to talk about was All the Murmuring Bones. I read this last year. It's by AJ Slatter. She's a Brisbane author. This book has done quite well over in the US and the UK. It's a kind of fairy tale / kind of fantasy quest with sort of family history. It's just everything is in this book. It's a book about stories and the stories that families tell to kind of justify their darker actions, I guess. It really appealed to me because it's sort of things that I'm very, very much interested in. Just a really strong female protagonist who just is basically working out where she fits in the world. It was incredible. And AJ Slater has a new book coming out in June called Path of Thorns, which is going to be a continuation of that, not of that story, but of that world. I could read anything by AJ Slater. Angela Slater was her this series name. She's written a lot of very good short fiction and a really great novel set in Brisbane, or series set in Brisbane that started off with Vigil. So yeah, anything that she writes, I want to read. And then I thought I'd move, so that was kind of fantasy. The last, I guess, straight up science fiction novel that I read was This by Adam Roberts. He's a UK writer. He's a really good critic as well, a really good sort of thinker around speculative fiction. And This is a novel about essentially a hive mind that kind of springs from Facebook, really, and whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. And there's just so many ideas in this particular book. The beginning is that, I guess, it gets used a lot, but a tour de force. where he basically goes through every single science fictional premise, but then he wraps it up in the Bardo, which is a Buddhist concept. It's kind of a purgatory, I guess. So yeah, it's a really interesting novel of ideas. Adam Roberts is he tends to write, he understands the imagery of science fiction, but he's also writes a lot about philosophy as well. So this is about Hegel. So a lot of it goes over my head, but I don't care because it's just so well written and so full of ideas that it just drags you along. And so that only came out fairly recently, but yeah, highly recommended. Actually, anything that Adam Roberts writes, I would read.
It sounds very, very kind of dystopian in its speculative examination.
It is, and he always has a kind of dystopian edge to his prose. His first novel was Salt, was written, I think, could be 21 years ago now, and it was about the sort of a rise of a Stalin-esque dictator on a colony world. And he has a touch of, I know he's a big Le Guin fan, and he's very much, there's an element of Le Guin in his prose and in his way of unpacking society, basically. So it's really, high-end intellectual science fiction that is a delight to read as well. And then the other two things, I thought I'd talk about things that are coming out. Claire Coleman has a new book out, which I haven't read yet, called Enclave. It's coming out in July. She is an Australian Indigenous author, and just incredible. Every book that Claire writes is worth reading, and so I'm very excited about that one. I don't know too much about it, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'm sure a lot of other people as well. And how many books can I go with? Because I actually have more than.
You can
4.
go with as many as you want. Like I'm just lapping up all of the ideas, like the concepts and ideas that these books are playing with. So you can hit me with as many as you want.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of more interesting things to say about that.
Well,
oh man, I didn't know I had to do an essay.
I'm sorry. I'm a bookseller, and you have to.
See, I'm a publisher. I'm like, is the story working? Am I in love with the characters? Am I reading page to page? The themes, the metaphors, the academic. Just stop it.
But they're all really important things too.
I know, but the machine's got to work. The engine, the book's got to work.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
It's a summary of the book publishing industry in a nutshell.
The next book I wanted to talk about, it's coming out in April, and I actually have a copy. It's Alan Baxter's The Fall. It's a sequel to The Gulp. Now, Alan Baxter has published these himself, but they're really great kind of cosmic rural novellas, so cosmic horror novellas. And I feel like he's one of the hardest working authors in Australia. I feel very, very lazy. My output dropped off after I had 2 children. I wonder if that's anyway.
Alan's got children too, and dogs.
I know, he's got one. He's only got one.
Has he?
But he is incredible. And this series is really scary. It's actually, I've still got The Gulp. I still have to finish The Gulp because I keep stopping, and and also a lot of distractions. But he's really, really good, and I think he's in the top of his game. He's only getting better. And so The Fall is his new one, and it's set in the town The Gulp, which is like this isolated coastal community, which is quite wonderful. And then I thought there's 2 other books that I wouldn't mind talking about if we have time. Another one which I've only just started. I read the first book a while ago. It's the Marlon James, Moonwitch Spider King, which was the follow-up to Black Leopard Red Wolf, which I loved. But they're really dense. I guess they're sort of a fantasy African setting, ultra-violent sort of sword and sorcery, but written with sort of high-end prose. And they're the kind of books that you have to just let them bludgeon you while you're reading it. And then it takes you half of the book, you're not sure if you're liking it. And then you just get into that world, and it just convinces you that it's you have to read it. Marlon James writes like no one else. And it's just like an incredible fantasy adventure. And he's written, it's going to be 3 books that they all tell essentially the same story, but from different perspectives, and they broaden that out. So it's a kind of we've seen that type of storytelling before, but not with the density and control that Marlon James has. He manages to be so precise and controlled, but also just all over the place as well. So it's a challenging read, but really, really good. And then finally, another author who I just adore is Lavi Tidhar. And he wrote a book called By Force Alone, which is actually a little bit old now, but I only got around to reading it last year. And it's basically a retelling of the King Arthur myth. So he does it in such an interesting way. It's very different to T.H. White, but a lot of fun. And Lavi can be very moving. He has a lot of ideas, and he can also be very, very silly. And somehow he manages to combine all those elements in the one story. So he would move me almost to tears with this book, and then I'd be like, oh, that was the lamest joke ever. So it's just, but it just works. Yeah, so anything by Lavi Tidhar I would recommend too. And he has a newish one called The Escapement that came out about 3 or 4 months ago. That's definitely worth reading too. He's a Israeli writer. English is his second language, and I'm so jealous because he uses it so well.
Oh God, you always see those people who are so eloquent on the page, and you go, oh, damn it. I wish I could do that. Thank you so much, Trent. Like, we've covered so much ground just in all of those books that you've discussed, from your sci-fi to horror to everything else in between. It just goes to show how fantastic this genre is right now. Before we move on to David and his spec fic recommendations, we have our obligatory sponsor for the week. We have a sponsored book, which is the sponsor of this podcast. And our sponsored book is Her Last Words by Kim Kelly. A murder, a missing manuscript, and undying love. From the gritty glamour of Bondi Beach to the cold streets of London, this is a tale of tragedy and literary betrayal, of a publishing industry grappling with change and a great love drowning in guilt-racked grief. Haunting, whimsical, and sharply observed, Her Last Words lays the bare truth that, while some crimes might go unpublished among the privileged, words themselves have a way of enduring and exacting a justice all to their own. Her Last Words by Kim Kelly is our sponsored book of the week. And you can buy that right now at booktopia.com.au. So, David, I will now throw to you.
Throw to me.
Yes, for the books that you have brought along for our Spec Fic.
Well, look, I apologize to anybody listening that I actually don't get to read anything but the books that I am involved in. There is just no time. I mean, I always say I don't get to read for pleasure anymore, but actually reading manuscripts is a pleasure. And so many great things come across. So I will just throw, first up, I'm going to do Laura Sebastian, who's an American writer, and she has done a book called Half Sick of Shadows, which I'm just bringing it up because Trent mentioned the other Arthurian book there. Whereas Half Sick of Shadows is taking the Arthurian legend and telling it with the females in the foreground, which, you know, her writing is excellent, but it's one of these books where after you've read it, it feels silly that the women weren't getting much airtime in previous Arthur tellings. It's like when you read Claire Wright and you go, yeah, you know, there were women in history, weren't there? And so it seems like half the story without them. So, and actually, I mean, and Laura Sebastian is one that whenever she's going to write another book, I'll be leaping onto that. I will also like to give a shout out to Marley Jane Ward, who's an author I've been working with for many years, and she writes novellas, which, you know, is the bane of everyone's existence. I love them. I think they're great for storytelling, but booksellers aren't as keen. So we've actually managed to get all three together in one book at last with a nice shiny foil on it. And so this is the Orphan Core Trilogy, which starts with an orphan aging out from this corporate orphanage and then descending into the dystopian world, trying to find her lost friend, and then into prison core for the grand finale. She's just an amazing writer with an amazing voice. So I'm glad to be able to get her book back out there. Then I've got one coming up. So this is my first horror that I've ever signed because, you know, I'm a gentle soul and horror is normally just scary as, and just leaves horrible images in my mind. And I don't know why people write it or read it. This New Zealand English guy called Paul M. Clark has written something called The Witchfinder's Mark. and it is about a witch finder, and he starts off as a non-genuine witch finder during the English Civil War, which is again a fascinating period, which we don't even usually call it the English Civil War because the English shame, and but really this is just one of those ones where you read the writing and the violence comes on so suddenly, quick, brutally, and beautiful. It's a bit like Kill Bill. It's just like, oh my God, there's a dancing violent sequence which is destroying everything. So yeah, that is one to watch, and I think that's coming out June this year.
I do love a good. Is it very stylized violence? Something that you would catch in like an adult J. Christoph novel or equivalent?
Yeah. Look, it feels like it. And for me, it just passed over me so quickly, and it didn't shock me. Whereas and yet very, very, very brutal and visceral. Blood on your face as you read the pages, that kind of thing. And lastly, some book by Trent Jamieson. The Stone Road, which I think just came out yesterday. I mean, depending on when you're listening to it, the Ides of March. It's been a long road, the Stone Road, hasn't it, Trent?
Oh, it has. A very, very long road.
And this is one of the ones where when people try to get me to describe it, it's like, it's a bit, hang on a minute, it's a bit fantasy. No, it's kind of, it feels like fantasy, but it's kind of sci-fi. No, it's dystopian. Is it dystopian? But then it's kind of horror. And it actually keeps sticking with me every time, every now and then I see something in the world and it just keeps coming up. And so this town is essentially, it's this anonymous town in the middle of nowhere. And this little girl has to inherit the grandmother's mission of protecting the town from the monsters coming from who knows where. And then as she's born, this place called Furnace appears on the horizon, and all the townspeople get taken one by one or two by two into Furnace, and they just disappear. And eventually things get worse. I don't think we want to say any more than that. And it's the disappearing thing and the weirdness of the nature of truth and what's surrounding her, and it just keeps coming up in the real world as we're watching all this terrible news and stuff happening and going, yeah, the fog is starting to surround my little town of life. And so I feel the Stone Road, well, it may be a bit more allegorical than I expected at first. What do you think, Trent?
I think that sounds very much like it. It is a hard book to talk about, and it has been such a long road. It's hard to disconnect the actual process of it. I guess for me, because in a way, it's me using fantasy to write about growing up in small country towns, and I've kind of done that twice. But yeah, and also looking at, it is such a challenge talking about your own book, isn't it?
It is. This one especially, because it is part horror. I mean, we were trying to call it literary horror, but then there are these hints that it's a dystopian future and it's just sort of society's regressed, and something either out of control science or magic has affected many parts and people and animals. But yeah, I can see the little town, that connection, disconnection, people coming, going, disappearing. Yeah.
And the way that happens in small communities as well. And I know it kind of is a bookend to my previous book, Day Boy. They are sort of in the same world, sort of not, which is like this. I've been thinking about how to describe what that world is, because it's not really Australia, but it's almost like a secondary world, Australia. But also then it's disconnected from everything. Like it's almost like a dream that somebody is having about a place in a way. And I think part of the effort of making that work has been the long part of that road with writing it. So yeah, and but it's also very much about coming into adulthood, learning that your parents and your grandparents have stories that you may not understand, but then slowly learning what that means, but all within the context of fighting monsters and protecting your community, which is a very big thing to put on the shoulders of a child. But yes, I have to think of a punchier way of talking about this.
Look, it's one of those things where we're meant to try and boil books down to these tiny little short sentences, but some of the best books, you just can't. You just can't, and maybe you shouldn't.
You got to go in and experience the whole thing for yourself. It's kind of sometimes how you feel about it. It sounds very like a very timely book. I won't lie, considering the world that we live in right now.
Well, they constantly refer to the years of heat and sadness. So it's, and I was very much thinking about this time. And then when things started to really kick off with the book, and you know, it was looking like it's finding a home. I was just as COVID kicked into gear as well. So it did feel kind of timely. But it's like, I think, David, you said to me once when I was reading through it going, does this actually work at all? And you said you just have to let the language roll over you.
It is very dreamlike and beautiful writing. So well done.
Oh, thank you.
It's great this is a good spot to finish up, because again, it highlights, you know, you mentioned at the top of the podcast how good speculative fiction takes the times that we're in and inverts it and adds something to it. And I think this book certainly, by the sounds of it, does that. And I'll have to grab a copy myself to check it out myself as well.
They're hot off the press.
Yes, indeed. Literally
wet,
hot off the press.
They could be wet off the press, might be more accurate.
Thank you both. So before I let you go and let you get back to the incredibly amazing work that you do in the industry, we'll finish off with a couple of fun little questions, just some fun scenarios to put a smile on your dial. So I'll throw this one to you first, David. What is the perfect idea of a night with a book for you?
Oh, sitting in a cafe with a book and maybe a nice French cider. That'd be amazing.
Yes.
Not too loud on the music. Something light, no lyrics, so I can read. Yeah.
Similar for you, Trent, or are you staying in bed?
That sounds perfect. Actually, the cafe. Maybe it's raining a little bit outside, and
yeah. There's definitely a reason you can't leave.
Yes.
No one's going anywhere.
No one's going anywhere.
Yeah, I like that. What is the perfect sci-fi spec fic location for you in your eyes? I'll throw to you first for this, Trent. Is it a far-off planet? Are you on a lost spaceship, Dead Space style? What's the perfect location for you when you look for your spec fic?
Well, I really like urban locations.
So that's what I was going to say.
Well, you know, I did write a whole series set in Brisbane, and I feel like because I'm a country boy who moved to the city, it's always had this appeal that it's never lost that for me, because I never felt like I had to move out. So to me, Brisbane was this, when I moved here, it was this wonderful place where you could catch a bus to places because, you know, there's public transport. And when I used to work,
it's the future.
I know, but you know, I haven't got it. It kind of was. I still feel enchanted when it's raining and it's the city lights are on, and I get into the CBD, which doesn't happen that often now. And the buildings just kind of look like they're moving through space. There'll be some low cloud. There's something just, and maybe it's also Blade Runner as well. So that urban location, that kind of rundown space where, you know, there are people, that's where stories happen. That's where people gather. And so for me, give me a city landscape, an urban landscape. And I think that's just a perfect SF locale.
I mean, look, it's almost closer for me. It's basically the home. Because you know we do live in sci-fi times a bit, and to get to the future and really connect it, and it's almost like horror. You want it in the home. You want it to really connect. So if it starts in somebody's home that I feel is like his home, and then the sci-fi comes in and then takes me wherever it wants to, I think that's the best launching pad. Though I do have one coming up with a granny in space, so that's going to be amazing.
Oh my God, yes. And to finish off, for a bit of fun, if you had to meet one character from a speculative fiction book, can be any character you choose, who would it be? David, I'm going to throw you under the bus and ask you this one first.
Look, I think it's going to be Horse Lover Fat. It's Horse Lover Fat was Philip K. Dick's alter ego that he inserted in a book or two. So
any chance to meet Philip, we would do it. Even if it's an alter ego, we'd take it.
Yep.
Trent, can you do better than Philip K. Dick?
Honestly, that's such a challenge, because quite often the characters are really like I don't think they'd be much fun to be around. So I'm just going to go with Bilbo Baggins, and you can visit, have a cup of tea.
Oh yes.
Yeah, just enjoy that view throughout the door. It's been a long time since I've smoked, but have a pipe of smoke with
really long pipe.
Yeah, just sit out there,
blow smoke rings, and then
absolutely.
Hopefully a big grey wizard shows up and
go off and have adventures.
Yeah, and you go, no adventures today. I'm staying here with my tea.
It's a really nice cup of tea. All right, I'm sure he'd know how to make a good pot of tea.
I genuinely think that of all the, if people ask, well, would you be an elf, a wizard, or anything in Lord of the Rings? I think the majority of people would increasingly say, I'd be a hobbit. I would just sit and eat and drink all day. It sounds like bliss.
That's middle age coming on there, Nick.
I could honestly chat to you guys forever about speculative fiction, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you so much, Trent and David. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for all of our listeners, you can find links to all of the books mentioned in the description today. And if you're just looking for books in general, we know this website. It's called booktopia.com.au. It's a good website. You should check it out. Please go check it out. Buy a book. Help me keep a job by doing that. And you can check out millions and millions of titles on there. So stay tuned for our next episode, which will be next Wednesday, where we'll be sticking with the fiction theme, and I'll be bringing you a special episode on novels that are focused on connecting culture, where we chat with Omar J. Sakar on his book Son of Sin, and Kari Gislason on The Sorrow Stone. Thanks for listening, and never stop reading.